good evening. We're thrilled to welcome you to Independent Australia's election live stream. I'm Michelle Piney, and my co-host this evening is IA founder and publisher and media maverick, Dave Donovan.
Hi.
Hi, Dave. Now, we'll be bringing you live election developments each hour throughout the evening, and we'll be joined by special guests, including former independent federal MP for Wentworth, Professor Kerryn Phelps, author and academic Dr Tim Dunlop.
I think one of the major issues that I can see in this election is the performance of the media, which Tim Dunlop has written a very good piece in for his blog just this week, which we'll be discussing with him. I think, the issues are obviously all of us want to get this sort of quasi-fascist Pentecostal weirdo out of power, but whether the majority of Australians will agree with us still remains to be seen. In any case, how are we going with Tim Dunlop? No video.
No video, but I believe we can do audio. I think he said.
All right, let's see whether we can do audio with Tim.
Yeah. So that's interesting anyway, Dave, and we'll just see if Tim's there. Are you there, Tim?
Yes, I am. Hi, how are you?
Oh, excellent. Good. How are you? Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome.
So early in the piece, we know, and I'm assuming that you're watching the coverage, Tim.
Yes, I am. Mainly had the ABC on, flicked over to Sky a little bit for my sins, but mainly the ABC.
Hey Tim, can I interrupt you for a moment? So I'm really sorry. Do you have a like a camera, like a
no?
That
I'm actually out at a function, and I'm hiding in a room, and it just seems to be bad internet connection. I'm sorry, so it's probably best I think it'll cut out if I turn on the video on.
Yeah, we were missing something. Sorry, carry on, Michelle. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just, Tim's a very good-looking man. I just wanted all our viewers to be able to also enjoy his fairly refined features.
Thank you. Excellent face for radio.
Oh, I doubt that, Tim. But anyway, so what are your thoughts so far? I believe earlier on you told me that you were somewhat concerned about the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all are really. It's been very hard to judge in the whole lead up to this which direction it was going to go, based on the as you guys were saying, the very early votes that we have at the moment. It's still very unclear as to which direction it's going. I'm not sure you call it a trend, but the only thing that does seem to be happening is that the primary vote for both the major parties seems to be taking a fairly major hit. It's just unclear. The way they do the figures doesn't really disaggregate where the votes are going, but it does seem to be spreading across One Nation, the Greens, the Teals, to some extent, and UAP, unfortunately.
Look, you had an extremely interesting article this week, which I shared on my Twitter feed, which I thought was very strong. It was totally reasonable, where you outlined some of the faults of the Morrison government and why they shouldn't be re-elected. I wonder whether you might be able to, first of all, name check your blog, which is great, and maybe talk our listeners through your thoughts there, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. The place that I write is called The Future of Everything, and it's a Substack newsletter. So if people just Google that combination of words, I'm sure I'll come up.
Well worth subscribing to, for sure.
Thank you very much. My basic point in that article was to reiterate something I've been talking about over the last 3 years, and it is the nature of the Morrison government, which I think is kind of an anti-government. They're not really interested in governing in the conventional sense. And we see that with everything from the way they've reacted to fire and flood, the way they react to climate change, where they do not see their role as intervening and helping and managing the risk around these major events. And they seem much more interested in, it's not governing for its own sake, and it's not governing just for the sake of power, but it is a kind of a rewarding of people that they think should be rewarded. And we see this, obviously, the most obvious example of this, other than the ones I've already mentioned, is the so-called pork barrelling or the rorting in either marginal seats or just giving money to Liberal seats or Liberal National Party seats.
You'd regard it as being, sorry, Tim, just to butt in.
Sure.
You know, like Lee Sales with Anthony Albanese. You'd see that as, you'd see the Morrison government as being a little bit of a kleptocracy. Is that right? In a sense, or a cronyistic sort of thing.
It's moving in that direction. It's kind of, it's like the American Republican Party. They, you know, kind of unashamedly govern for people who support them, which on one level obviously makes sense, but the whole notion of democratic government is that, you know, you govern for everybody, you govern for the nation. I don't think they really share that vision of democracy, and they're quite happy to redistribute funds and give their attention to areas that they think should get it. And often that's, you know, rewarding the richest and the most well-off and their own electorates.
Tim, it doesn't seem to me that they have any real, you know, sort of democratic bent at all.
No, I think that's
Morrison
right.
was saying that, you know, there would be something like a public autocracy if you allowed public servants to actually determine where publicly funded grants could go to. You know,
yeah, it was an extraordinary statement that he made. He said, you know, he was like horrified at the notion that you would allow public servants in various departments to decide how funds were distributed in various portfolios. And his argument is that, you know, they're not elected, we're elected, so we get to do it. But it's the same argument that he uses as to why he doesn't want a federal ICAC. It's like, I'm only accountable to the voters. So during the whole period of my rule, nobody can hold me accountable. If the voters want to hold me accountable, well, they can do that at the election. And you know, this flies in the face of most conventional notions of democratic governance, where there is, you know, apart from anything else, a ministerial responsibility to govern with a certain, you know, equality, and not just on behalf of those people who you think should get support.
Which leads me on to your other main theme in that article that we mentioned, which was that the media's performance in this election, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, maybe if we could, you know, easily vote people out and there wasn't a sort of, you know, tilted pinball machine, you know, with the media, with a strong fourth estate, you know, perhaps, you know, like 3 years of rorting wouldn't be so bad. But I think you were talking about the media seeming to exhibit quite a profound bias.
Well, I think they do. I mean, there are obviously elements of the Australian media, particularly the Murdoch media, who are just openly biased. You know, they're there to carry on their shoulders any form of Liberal National Party government that happens to come into power. They don't really care. I guess they were less enamoured of Malcolm Turnbull, but in general, you know, they see their role as to be a handmaiden to that side of politics, and I don't think they make any bones about that at this stage. And Yeah, so, but I think the bigger problem with the media goes well beyond bias across all the other areas where
Sort of
they're,
structural issues which create
yeah,
inequity.
they've, you know, obviously they've been gutted a little bit because of changes to the business model in the last 20 years. They're just not as wealthy organisations as they used to be. So they're employing fewer people. There are
More junior people
incentives
too, it
within
seems.
the ecosystem in terms of, you know, the attracting audiences that kind of reward a sort of us and them and you know, sporting sort of approach to politics. And I think we've really seen that in this election with the whole
Yeah, the
farcical notion
racehorse, I
of,
think you talked about in one of your
yeah, the
articles
racehorse sort of
recently.
thing. And you
Yeah.
see it with the you know, the buses following the leaders around. It becomes very competitive, and you know, it's who can trap someone into saying something or not saying something, and you know, making a mountain out of a molehill. We saw that a number of times with things that Anthony Albanese did. So
Sure.
I just think there's sort of a profound unseriousness about how they cover politics a lot of the time. I've got to say, like today I voted here in Melbourne at my local electorate. It's the polling booth not far from where I live, and it was a beautiful day here in Melbourne, and people were lined up kind of around the block. It was a fairly long queue to get in, but it was this fantastic
Tim, I think we might have lost your audio there.
Oh,
Look,
is it back?
Oh, no,
yeah,
it's back.
it's
Yeah.
back, but yeah, sorry. just
Anyway,
continue your
my
thought
point
there.
was that that it. I think Australians take actually, and what we're seeing at the moment with the rise of these various independents is there's actually something of a renaissance happening in Australian democracy. You've seen these huge groundswells of grassroots movements created over the last couple of years, and I think one of my main criticisms of the media is that they're not really picking up on the profundity of that change that's happening, and they're still kind of looking at elections through a rather outdated model of
Yes.
of media coverage, and I think that's really unfortunate for our democracy.
Tim,
Tim,
sorry, just
sorry.
before you go on, Michelle, we're sort of getting to the end of our sort of time limit. Michelle, I will ask one more question, then we're going to have to break for a little while. So carry on, Michelle.
Yeah. So, Tim, I believe that you know, I was watching, unfortunately. I think it was actually ABC, and it was Tim Wilson,
Right.
whose seat, of course, seat of Goldstein is under threat at the moment. Apparently, well, so we believe. It's very hard to know, but from the independent Dr. Monique Ryan, and he described the movement that's happening within his own electorate as an unholy alliance between Get Up, Extinction Rebellion, the Labor Party, and the Teal Independents, which I find absolutely extraordinary. That he would suggest that there's some kind of conspiracy, and he said, and basically the whole aim of it was to make sure that seat was wrenched away from the Liberal Party. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, Tim Wilson's one of those guys who was born on the boundary and thinks he hit a six. You know, it's he. He's spoiled, he's privileged, and the very notion that somebody could come along and take something away from him is almost unthinkable to him. So of course he's got to come up with these ridiculous conspiracy theories. What he's actually facing is, in the form of Zoe Daniel, is a legitimate grassroots candidate who has rallied the electorate in a professional and profound way, and it looks like they're going to kick his ass. And
Yeah.
you know,
Thank you.
that's all that's happening. That's what's happening with all these independent seats, and especially the Teal seats. They are seats that the Liberal Party have taken for granted for many years, and they've actually managed to generate, through the Voices of movement, candidates who the electorates themselves take seriously, and it looks like they're going to do quite well.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for fixing my blunder there. It's actually Zoe Daniel, not Monique Ryan. That's Josh Frydenberg's
right.
seat,
Yeah. Okay.
We should be which we should be looking at very shortly. But thank you so very much, Tim, for
you're
all
welcome.
your insight.
Nice to talk to you
evening.
both. Thank you, Michelle, and thanks,
Thanks
Dave.
so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay.
Keep up the great work. Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye. Why don't we have a word now to Professor Kerryn Phelps. We'll just see if she's ready to go. Yes, there she is. So Professor Kerryn Phelps, AM, is an IA columnist, a general practitioner, and former president of the Australian Medical Association, and the former federal member for Wentworth. Welcome, Kerryn.
Thanks, Michelle. Hello, David.
Great to have you on, Kerryn.
Pleasure to be here.
Very good indeed. Yeah. Now, Kerryn, you, of course, have quite a lot of information and experience in the seat of Wentworth, which is one of the seats tipped to go to a Teal independent. And you've said throughout this election the independent movement is not to be underestimated. What are your thoughts on how Allegra Spender is going there at the moment?
She's polling very strongly at the moment. From what I can see from the latest reports, it's looking around 45-55 to candidate preferred in her favour. But there's looking to me like a very strong showing for a number of the Teal independents. Anthony Green has already called Warringah Fazali Steggall.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's a win.
Well done, Zali.
Yes.
Sophie Stomps is ahead in Mackellar at the moment. Allegra Spender is ahead in Wentworth at the moment. Kylie Tink's ahead to candidate preferred in North Sydney. Indi is looking very strong for Helen Haynes at the moment,
Yes.
although it's close. Zoe Daniels ahead in Goldstein and Monique Ryan's ahead in Kooyong. Andrew Wilkie will retain Clark, and Rebecca Sharkey will retain Mayo in South Australia, so they'll return to the crossbench. Adam Banser retain, and as you mentioned earlier, possible Green gain in Griffith. So, I mean, there is a path here for a very strong independent and Green crossbench.
Right. And so what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I know you've actually written for us about this very issue as well, but what are your thoughts about how that would work if Labor were in fact to gain power in this election with a very strong independent crossbench?
Well, everything depends on the numbers, of course, as you know, and so what we would be looking at is over the next few hours, and it's still quite a few seats hanging in the balance, and the polls only just closed a half an hour or so ago in Western Australia, and so we'll be looking at Kate Cheney's independent over there in Western Australia and how she goes, which I think will be a very interesting result. But looking at what is going to happen in Western Australia, there could be a bigger swing there than in other parts of the country. But what's been very interesting is seeing that the primary vote for the major parties looks like it's fractured in a lot of the seats. And even where those seats have been retained by the major parties, it's looking very much like there's a lot of interest in another way. And so in some cases, there's been a big shift across of some votes to the Greens, and where there is one of these strong centrist so-called Teal independents making very, very strong showing. And as I said, almost all of those are currently ahead in their seats. So that's fantastic news for this new movement. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens once all the votes are counted. And of course, there are a lot of postal votes, so we have to be very cautious with any predictions at the moment, because what I've discovered in running a by-election campaign and then a federal election campaign quite close to each other in 2018 and 2019 was that you really can't be sure unless there is a very big disparity between the Liberal candidate, for example, and the independent candidate until the postal votes come in, and you start seeing what trend is happening with the postal votes, because they can make quite a difference.
Indeed. And so what do you make, sorry, Dave, you can have the next one, but what do you make of this reference that Tim Wilson actually made to the Teal independent movement as an unholy alliance between what he terms Get Up, I think he threw in Extinction Rebellion and every other movement that we've ever heard of. He's lumped them in with the Labor Party and and the Greens, and they've all sort of had this idea that they're going to bring down the Liberal Party. What do you make of that assessment?
Well, one of the things that has really been quite evident over this campaign is the attitude of some members of Parliament who are in what they thought were safe seats, having this sort of sense of entitlement to the seat for life. And what the community independent movement has shown is that it's actually up to communities to elect their representative to have their voice in Parliament. It's called a House of Representatives for a reason. And what the independents are showing is that communities can have this organic growth of a movement within that has come from a sense of dissatisfaction with a major party. And there's been a lot of frustration, and I have written about this sense of frustration boiling over to anger in some respects. I mean, there's certainly been some anger amongst women about some of the women's issues, like, for example, safety in the workplace and sexual harassment issues, things like the gender pay gap, the gender superannuation gap, the poor deal.
Oh, those little things.
Get. Yeah, those little bits and pieces, the affordability of childcare. So there's been there's really no coincidence that the majority of these independents are strong, professional, accomplished women who are reflecting a lot of the views of the women and men in their communities who do want to see a better deal for women. And of course, then you've got the climate issue, and the teal colouring is symbolic of being partway between small L liberal values with environmental credentials. And it's now seen as eminently sensible that we deal with the climate crisis that's upon us. It's not a fringe issue. Young people have been right on board with this for a very long time now. And so we're seeing young people and women, so there are those groups. We're also seeing across the board in really most demographics, people wanting to see a return to good governance and to a sense of integrity and trust in our Parliament. And the fact that the Liberal and National Coalition have steadfastly refused to introduce an Integrity Commission with the excuse that they wanted everybody to just not debate the elements of an Integrity Commission, but they just wanted to introduce their particular brand of an Integrity Commission without any changes to it. And people are saying, hang on a second, that's actually not what the judiciary is saying is a good idea. It's not what the independents are saying is a good idea. It's not what Labor is saying is an ideal form of an Integrity Commission. So there's that issue, which the independents have really focused very strongly on. And then, of course, there are other issues that have come to the fore, like aged care, healthcare, cost of living, minimum wage, all of these issues that really need a fresh approach, and where people did not necessarily want to go to Labor's ideas for that. They in some of these seats are saying, well, hang on a second, I want to look at what these independents have to offer. And they've had extensive conversations within their electorates to find out what it is that their electorates want, what their communities want in terms of a representative going to Canberra. And this is why I'm seeing such a strong showing amongst these wonderful candidates around the country.
Fantastic. Dave, you had a question as well.
Yes, Dr. Phelps. Look, I just want to thank you so much for your regular column for Independent Australia. It's been, truly a delight for our readers to have your insight. And thank you very much for coming on this show as well. I just wanted to ask your opinion about the claim that's been made, not only by the government, but also in the media, that a a minority government, which, you know, might have, you know, some of these so-called teal independents as determining factors, would cause chaos in Parliament? Or, you know, do you think that perhaps it might lead, as you said, with more women, with a less adversarial approach to Parliament, to a more collaborative form of democracy?
Well, I'll start by quoting Cathy McGowan from Q&A last Thursday, who said that in her parliamentary experience, the most chaotic time that she has ever experienced was when Malcolm Turnbull was deposed as Prime Minister, and you had Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison vying for his job, and then he left, and then that was a by-election, and then I was elected at that by-election. And then the day after my first speech in Parliament, Julia Banks, out of principle, left the Liberal Party and completed her term as an independent. And at that time, we had a balanced minority government. I mean, bearing in mind that we've had a minority government for years and years, which is the Liberal and National Coalition, and nobody knows what the agreement is. What's the deal between the Liberal Nationals and the Liberal National Party in Queensland? We don't know what deal they have to form a government, apart from the
National Party gets about 5% of the national vote, you know, which is,
and,
you know,
and
amazing.
Yet they have so much influence. So we had all this chaos around the leadership, okay? And then we had this balanced crossbench when Julia Banks and I joined the crossbench within a short period of time. And we were able to see superb legislation. The Medivac legislation passed during that period of time, during those few months, negotiated, drafted, and consulted widely with the sector across Labor, Greens, the Independents, and we came up with this life-saving legislation. Now, that is the sort of thing that a sensible crossbench like this would be able to achieve in a minority government. I don't call that chaos. I call that good government.
Democracy, maybe.
Representing the wishes of your community. And one thing I would like to address is this whole issue of governments who come in with a majority saying, well, we've got a mandate. Now, they might have 70% of their ideas being actually pretty jolly good, okay? But they might have 30% of their ideas that are just wacky. And we're supposed to accept that because they were voted in, that you've got to accept all the wacky things that they come up with, as well as the really good ideas. And that's, again, where a crossbench can have a really powerful influence in a minority or a balanced government. And that is where they can say, look, you know, agree, the community wanted you to have your hands on the steering wheel of government. But what they wanted is this insurance policy, so that we had another group of people with a bit of a different view who could amend legislation, who could toss out the ideas that were not in the community's best interest, and then negotiate around the edges of other legislation. Rather than you have this situation, which I often found, where we were having legislation thrown on our desks the day that we were supposed to be voting on it, sight unseen. Now, that's not the way legislation ought to be done. We should have time to deliberate, to actually debate things, not to have gag after gag after gag motion in the Parliament to stop people debating things. So when you have a strong crossbench, you will see more consultation, you will see more negotiation, you will see more debate. And I think that is healthy for democracy. And I've said that the emergence of this independent movement is going to usher in a new era of democracy. And I believe we are seeing the very beginnings of that. We saw it with Cathy McGowan in 2013, 2016, handed over to Helen Haynes in 2019, who looks like holding on to that seat again in Indi. We saw it in Wentworth in 2018, and Wentworth, you know, by the looks of it, may well return to independent hands, which would be a wonderful legacy. And then we have all of these other wonderful, superb candidates who have put their hands up and saying, I am prepared to leave my current professional life, a successful professional lives, and put my hand up to work for my community in the Parliament. That's what I did, and that's what these people are doing.
Oh, well done.
We concur, yeah. We think it would be a fantastic move for democracy, and we're certainly hoping that a lot of these wonderful candidates you know, are successful. And basically, we're hoping that we have a new government as well. So
I
thank you
think,
so very
can I
much.
just make one little point before we go? Just on that chaos point that is put out by both major parties, really, it should be noted that in Europe, minority governments are the norm. You know, having people actually negotiating and trying to reach the best solutions rather than having what is, you know, to use Scott Morrison's words, a party autocracy for 3 years, you know, actually does tend to produce far better results. And I think Germany would be a classic example, but, you know, right through Europe. So thanks so much for that, Kerryn. I personally feel that the rise of the independents is one of the best things that we've seen in Australian politics for many years. So thanks a lot for coming on. It's been very
Thank
interesting.
you, David. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Kerryn. Bye-bye. Now, I don't mean to brag, Dave, but I did call it before Anthony Green.
You called it. It was close, but you did call it about a minute before him. And we can look at the records are going to be there. It's astounding.
It's my little claim to fame.
Well, I think that's a big claim to fame. Anthony Green's got a reputation as some sort of a psephologist or some other word that I can't properly pronounce. And
he does indeed.
And look at you. You don't have any real sort of background or history. No one in the mainstream media on Twitter is talking about your credentials, but look at you, a minute before.
Exactly.
Good work, Michelle.